The Battlefield series has taken some serious lumps over the last few years. I mean, honestly, it's been all downhill since Bad Company 2 for me, but Battlefield 3, 4, Hardline, and even Battlefront, which I guess is essentially a total conversion mod of Battlefield, have all suffered from pretty much the same issues, though some of them, from my perspective, might surprise you. Battlefield 1's the first Battlefield game since about 2010 that's actually felt right for me, and I'm gonna tell you why. This is sort of a complicated issue, but it's easily the biggest and most important factor in why this game is so good. Battlefield has been defined by its scale pretty much since its inception. That's what set it apart. And with that scale comes the necessity of vehicles. For travel, for combat, for whatever. They just come with the territory. Now, the beauty of the vehicles in Battlefield 1 is that they're fallible. That probably sounds stupid, but give me a sec, I'm gonna explain. The planes of Battlefield 1, for instance, are vulnerable to fire from virtually any weapon, small arms and AA guns alike. Only AA guns and other higher yield weapons destroy them especially quickly, but overall the planes are much more vulnerable than either the jets of the previous Battlefield games or the attack helicopters of the previous games. And this is a good thing. Even if it's frustrating getting your ass blasted out of the sky, this keeps one plane from turning the course of an entire game, unless it's either piloted by someone unbelievably skilled, or unbelievably lucky, or some combination of the two. And tanks of course are still very powerful, but are also incredibly slow and can be dispatched very quickly by a coordinated squad of players using either anti-tank guns or mortars. Again, this is a good thing. In both cases, this across-the-board reduction in power keeps the appearance of a vehicle from being an outright death sentence, which it very much has been in the past. I mean, if you're skilled enough, you can take out a tank or plane all by yourself as long as you have the right loadout to do it. This doesn't mean vehicles are weak, mind you. Bomber planes can still lay waste to clustered groups of soldiers, or can demolish a tank with one bomb as long as you score an admittedly difficult to get direct hit. But this balancing of power between infantry and vehicles is the exact same thing that made Bad Company 2 such an amazing game, and it could only be possible with the game taking up this particular period in time. This particular period in time is when we had experimental vehicles and experimental weaponry that didn't quite work right yet, so it makes sense that it would be fallible and vulnerable in such major ways. But there is one other important commonality between this and Bad Company 2 though. Now this is something that's really bothered me in Battlefield 3 more than anything else, and as we approach the end of the previous console gen, the gap between console hardware and PC hardware was vast. I mean, seriously vast. The depth of Randy Pitchford's sliminess kind of vast. So because of this vast difference in hardware between the platforms that these games were released on, major concessions had to be made on one platform that usually affected the other, whether directly or otherwise. For instance, on Xbox 360 and Battlefield 3, there could only be a fraction of the number of players you could have in a match on PC. This meant that maps had to be chopped up or parted off on console, and eventually they were just shrunk altogether. This made for a worst of both worlds kind of situation. On top of this, the lower player count meant that a larger percentage of players would be using vehicles at any given time. More players in vehicles than on foot throws the balance of the game off to the point where players on foot are literally incapable of doing anything significant themselves, at least not without massive frustration. And this made maps with open space and airborne vehicles an absolute nightmare to play. Thanks to this hardware gap narrowing in a significant way, we finally see the developers getting to be somewhat untethered from the restrictions of the past few games. This was improved further by the closing of Call of Duty Modern Warfare introduced RPG mechanics to the world of multiplayer shooting games, and since then, pretty much every game of an even remotely similar ilk has had some sort of RPG mechanics, RPG-light mechanics. The unlocking things over time is a nice carrot. It's a motivation to keep you playing and playing, using the compulsion of progressing to pick up the slack where enjoying the gameplay is not enough to keep you coming back. The problem with this is that the players with the most experience playing the game, which is already a massive advantage, also have the best equipment options. This puts new players at a disadvantage so vast that starting fresh even a week after a new shooting game is out is a surefire way to end up frustrated and pissed off. This was especially bad with vehicle loadouts in previous Battlefield games, as you needed to get points while in that vehicle to earn the new loadout options for that vehicle, but because you don't have the loadout options, you can't defend yourself from the other players who do. It's a real catch-22 and is one of the reasons why I never went back to Battlefield 3 or 4 after the first month. Playing against other people who have an objective advantage over you is an absolute nightmare. and is such an obvious flaw with the progression system for the game that I do not know how it took them so long to figure out the solution that's currently in place. Battlefield 1 allots you individual points as you level up that you can use to unlock new guns, new vehicle loadouts, or whatever. There are still level restrictions on guns, but the sting of this is lessened by the fact that there is better gun balance overall, so other than one or two exceptions, virtually every gun is equally viable. On top of this, you have the more balanced vehicles that I mentioned, and this makes Battlefield 1 a genuine joy to play regardless of your role. And one other big thing is, this is the smallest of the things I've talked about so far, but it's still important when it comes to the overall enjoyment to be had from playing this game. I've kind of had a World War I obsession for years. One of the most interesting things about World War I, though, is that there were no standards for anything yet, really. Everything was experimental. The Industrial Revolution made precision engineering possible, and advancements in engineering were happening faster than anyone could have possibly planned for. As a result, you have dozens of different weapons used in service during that period of time, most in very limited runs, but this means that Battlefield 1 is stocked with a lot of different guns, serving a lot of different functions. This makes for weapons that feel much more unique than in your standard Modern Warfare type of shooter, and the varying functionality of these weapons make it easier to tailor a certain loadout to your playstyle. There are limits, of course, and at the end of the day, a gun's a gun. You shoot it, it goes boom, the dude you're aiming at dies. But the variety helps keep the moment-to-moment play feeling fresh, because there's always a new gun to try, or a new role to fill, or a new predicament to try and settle. Like I mentioned earlier, these guns are not perfect. There are a few that need some serious balancing, but for the most part, they're all viable and enjoyable to use. But I've covered all the big things, so let's wrap this up. The last real selling point of the game for me are all the little things it gets right. The sound is phenomenal. The visuals are spectacular. What's more, the game is incredibly well optimized, and while my rig is pretty up there as far as power is concerned, I still have grown accustomed to newer games not looking as good or running as well as this one. I have my issues with the game. I will have my issues with any game, but overall, this is the first Battlefield game I've played since Bad Company 2 that I really love. And just as a quick side note, I mentioned I love World War I history. If you're interested in the history of World War I after having played or seen the game, there's a book called The Last of the Doughboys about the last American soldiers living after World War I, and a BBC documentary from 1964 called The Great War. Both contain awesome testimonials from soldiers that actually fought in World War I, and it might surprise you. But anyways, that's really all I had to say for now. I hope you enjoyed, and really thank you for watching.